So, hi, I'm Ruta, and I'm UX and UI designer at Making Waves. And
I'm Łukasz. I'm front-end developer at Sportsbroker. I'm working with designers closely for last couple of years. We've been also working together with Ruta, and we have some thoughts how we can improve this process. So maybe before we start, how many front-end developers or UI developers are here? Okay, quite a lot. And maybe some designers? Yeah, all right. Okay, so let's start. We just talk about some problems and maybe solutions, how we can improve the cooperation between designers and developers. And where is the pointer?
Okay, so first of all, we know that sometimes it goes good, sometimes it goes really, really bad. So, for example, you have these files and folders with names which are not really clear what they contain. And later you have, for example, different layers called layers, and also groups called groups. And when you want to drag one of them from one place, you don't really know which one you are trying to choose.
Yeah. Also, sometimes you want to implement some button or some other component, and then you realize that there are plenty actually of one simple primary buttons in your layout, and well, you don't really know what to use. Also, colors could be tricky because maybe developers know this 8 or 16 colors, but designers clearly see 3 different blues and 2 different reds, which differs only by the hex code.
And also it happens that instead of like 5 shades of gray, there are like 50 shades of gray. And you don't really know which one you want to use. And I think that is the thing you really we hate your designer for.
Especially if the gray is mixed with some opacity and you really don't know what's going on. And the communication problem, you want to find something and then you see that actually you don't even know where to start because it was just written somewhere you don't know where.
And quite often when designer goes to the developer and says like, hey, let's do this design and this animation, and you hear something like, come on, this effect is impossible to implement, and then you go to CodePen and you just send the ready solution, and there's like, oh, okay. So we end up with like this kind of problems and with this kind of relations, but
we can maybe slow down and think how and why things like this actually occurs. For the first look, we might see something like this, especially some waterfall projects or some projects where you have external contractors or companies where the business business requires something from the designer just deliver, and then it just go to the development process, and well, maybe this is not really a good idea how we should proceed with such processes. So we can find some problems which might occur because of this flow. So we can start with this design and development perspective. We will not talk about the business, let's focus here, but yeah, we can point some problems when design is delivered to the developer.
So first of all, there is, as we said, the chaos in the folders and the files names. And also, the next thing is that you have problem with proper layers naming. And later there's no consistency in colors and all the elements like font size, weight, and so on. And there is no component library, so you don't know really if there are like these 3 blue colors or just one. There's no style guide, so yeah. And also there is no information about element states, like the hover effect, active errors, and so on, and animation. And of course, they are impossible to implement mobile versions. I think that Łukasz can say more about that.
Well, designers sometimes deliver mobile versions which are maybe just too much to implement, and it's not that they have too creative ideas, but sometimes just designers don't know how exactly the CSS works if you scale something down. So yeah, sometimes designers go far more than putting some blocks down. Sometimes the sentences or content changes, for example, which is quite hard to implement. Then we can also see sometimes not complete designs. By this I mean lacking websites, because designers can prepare only the main sites, and then we miss some extra, maybe not so major designs, some layouts, which then somehow need to be implemented. In the end, we need some documentation how should we actually show different states of content. So there is a difference when we have an empty product list, when you have the search results, when you have one product, or maybe a pagination with a lot of products, or maybe an error. Well, everything should be actually provided by the designer, right? And in the end, we have problem with internationalization. So everyone who has ever created some stuff for Germany knows what I'm talking about. Very, very long words, and now these beautiful buttons are very big and impossible to fit anywhere.
But of course, there are also problems which designers have with development process. And first of all, when, for example, the designer wants to pass the design to the developer, and the designer just asks, like, how do you want it? Like, what will be the most comfortable way for you to give it, like, where do you want it? And sometimes you hear just send me the sketch file. And after a month, then you hear like, okay, just send me icons exported in SVG and send me this. So designer have to come back to this process which he actually wanted to go through like before. So sometimes it's really like important to have this environment set for the cooperation, like how to pass these elements.
And this is especially important because we, as a developers, need to be very precise. What do we want to get? So then we can comfortably work on this layouts we have. So designers will ask you, eventually should ask you, how do you want to have your designs? And this is your responsibility as a developers to provide this information. If you don't provide it, then it's just your fault that something is not actually good as you want it to. Okay. No sticking to designs. Well, this is clearly a big difference how developers see some designs and how designers do. For example, well, for me 10 and 20 pixels could be quite the same sometimes. For designers, it's always pixel perfect. I think that this could be solved by some good component libraries, but in the end, if we are provided with something, we should actually stick to it. We should make these paddings, margins, white spaces, whatever, keep properly coded. Yeah.
And also, designers don't see the work in progress, which is problematic also because of the previous point, because then like almost all the project is implemented, and there is like no room for changes. Sometimes changes in the design are needed when the implementation starts, and when the product is almost finished, it's like really hard and really like it costs a lot to make some changes in the design. So it really shouldn't work like that.
Also, if our application is already quite delivered to testers, to our QA, actually the QA process can be partially done by designers, right? So if we provide some environment for QA to test if our features work, we can also give it to designers who can maybe not test if this is perfectly fine, but they can validate their ideas in the real life and maybe introduce some changes or fixes on the early stages.
And two things you hear quite often as a designer: it's impossible to implement, or I have no time. And they say that, like, developers say that mostly when they just play FIFA or something like that. And yeah, I remember kids said the same. So, you know, it's not only designers' opinion. But, like, also the problem, big problem is with communication. Like, mostly this problem is the communication. So, first of all, there's no information about new changes or requirements.
Yeah, so we, the developers, are, at least I am, furious when my API changes and I don't know nothing about it, right? So now my app is broken, I don't know anything. Now then I hear that there's some new requirements from the business, and then, well, I have to just change it live or production or something like this. We hate it. So we should all think that not only the developers between developers should keep this good changelogs and versioning between them. We should also think about versioning and changelogs between designers and developers, right? Because even if we deliver something, something might change later. So let's say that designers create some new version, or I don't know, replace something with the new layout, whatever. They have to give us the information what was changed. They have to deliver us the new changes. We need to have some ticket and just update. But it's not only the design problem, because sometimes the business requires developers to do some changes. Maybe not especially on production, but there are something like, just change it like this because we have no time, and eventually it just stays for months, something like this, and then we have no synchronization between design and development, and then your QA can have some problems because, you don't know what is the truth anymore. So we need to keep this stuff documented and stick to it.
And also, there is like no simple discussion between designers and developers about solutions which will be implemented. And it happens that developer can know from his experience or her experience that there is some like better solution, easier solution, and but there's no talk. There's just designer is giving you a project and you like have no comment on that, or you just complain. So yeah, what is happening?
Yeah, about this point. This is quite important because sometimes designer just creates something very creative, and we need to spend a lot of time. But we are doing this magical MVP, which will be, next month released, but we need to spend 2 weeks or doing some nice custom selects. And what's the point, right? We know that, but we will just complain that designers don't know what we're doing. And instead, we can just ask, can we maybe do normal native selects for now and spare some time? And it's quite possible that business and client, just everyone will say, yeah, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to waste these 2 weeks on this custom feature. It was just the initial idea. So yeah, it's just worth to ask and to give your opinion.
And also, as we saw before, there's no main channel for communication. So we have like all these messages like in different places. There's like project management tool. There's also like chat tool. There's also private message because something is missing and you have to just catch the person you need. So yeah, it's also a problem.
And the private messages is also the problem, because a lot of people have some, if something is wrong, you just personally go to the designer, or designer go to the developer, whatever, and they agree something. But there are only 2 people in the company who actually are aware of that. That's why even if some problems are quite easy to solve directly, there are these Slack channels or whatever you have actually decide to be your communication channel, and use it properly. Use proper channels, try to make your information accessible for everyone, because next person who will work in this project needs to know what was decided before. And this is actually the point we mentioned in the point 2. So we need feedback, because a lot of people just don't know what will be the best solution. If the design is easy or not, designer can sometimes don't know it, and we need to just share this information to make this stuff works more smooth. Okay. And no, this is quite maybe not the same, but even if you have this Slack, for example, and this is the main communication channel, you can go quite further. And then, let's say, a few years ago, you are just delivered with some zip file with designs. And then you need to open this Word document and write down this stuff, that this design in this file now has this problem, and then you waste weeks on this process. And there are quite good tools which you can use for this. You can use some tools which will help you share the screens, share the ideas, prototypes, mock-ups. You can comment directly in the place which needs to be changed. It's quite good to use tools like this, and you'll just save some time. And in the end, most people use Jira or some other project management tool. It's also sometimes a problem when your Jira, for example, is misconfigured. It's quite a problem for communication. Sometimes it's good to experiment to maybe merge the process between designers or developers, or maybe link some tasks between, just to experiment and try to find some solution which will help all of us to work together more smooth.
Yeah, and in the end, we end up with a situation where designer is really frustrated and don't feel like working together. Developer is really frustrated. Also, the project manager really doesn't know what to say to the client because the product is delivered with the delay. And at the end, the budget goes up. So, yeah, but does it have to be like that? Like, let's be honest, I think there are really nice solutions to help that.
Yeah, so we have shown the process, which might seems to look like this. But is it, actually? Because in the real life, at least it should look like this. And everyone in the real life should cooperate between each other. And it's obviously oversimplification, because there are, let's say, more departments or more processes or stages which are happening in this agile environments. But even if these agile environments, sometimes people just are very closed. And even if you think about these iterations in our project, often we just close this iteration inside the development, for example. But we should have this iteration loop across all these departments, and it's just not a problem to make each department talk to every other, and it will be very helpful for us with progress and cooperation.
So let's think how we can improve this process. And first of all, let's agree on main communication channel for the project, where also will be configured well, because, for example, I think that we mostly use Slack now, and Slack allows us to use many integration, which will help you to keep all information about the project, not only chat, inside one channel, because you can use integration which will give you, for example, notification about changes in your project management tool. So you can really have everything in one place, so it will be helpful for everyone from the team.
And also, for example, recently what happened in my company, we had a problem with changelogs, with design, and then we figure out, all right, so we have these changelogs, we don't communicate well enough, so why don't we, for example, have some hooks on the design applications that will, for example, just send the notification on Slack that the new design was uploaded. How simple is that? And if it's just perfectly possible to implement. All right, another point which could be very useful is to have the stand-ups, which will be cross departments. I think in the original proper Scrum process, it's quite normal and obvious, but it's quite hard to actually find it in the real life, I think. And often the development is quite closed inside these developers and some project owner, manager, whatever. And designers just keep doing their job separately. And that's actually not good, because they are having problems which it's quite possible that we know how to solve, but we don't know that. And they keep posting their blockers each day, and we don't know it because we keep focusing on our problems, which might be solved by them. And if we just merge together and talk about our problems together, it's quite possible that in this bigger group we can together find a solution quicker.
And also on stand-ups we can see that people have also their experience about different projects, and sometimes they've been through one problem and maybe they know solution even if they don't even designer knows that because he's been through it with other developers. So it's also important to exchange this experience on this kind of meetings. And first of all, meet face to face and talk. And face to face really is important. It doesn't have to be only call without the webcam, because webcam really can help you because you see the expression. If someone will not understand something, probably you will see it on her face. So it's a really simple thing, but really helpful one.
And also, even if there are some conflicts in the team, or I don't know, people might not like each other or be just too fresh to like their teammates, having some meetings or some parties or even just these small talks face-to-face can much improve the just simple cooperation process. And it's much easier to communicate with someone if you see his face, his expressions. It just works, and it doesn't have to be every day, but sometimes it could be a great improvement to the overall process. And workshops, but workshops about project, about domain-related stuff, it's also quite good for cooperation. Why? Because developers are often not included into the business decision or this planning, let's say, of how the process, the product will look like. So let's imagine that we have this business department and they are just focusing on working closely with designers, with UX or UI team, and they keep this design, this process closed. And then developers are just using what was done before. And sometimes, obviously, things are simple, and this is not a problem. But sometimes developers have something like, why do we do that? It makes no sense, because we were not involved in the process. We didn't talk to client. And of course, it's impossible to make everyone talk to client and be so close. But if you sometimes, I don't know, depends on the project, create some workshops and explain why some decisions were made and what's behind it and what are actually the requirements, what is the purpose behind this, then it can make everyone be on the same page, and then we can just be aware of what are we actually doing here.
Yes, and also, for example, making ways to help, for example, organizing workshops. Set of tools and canvas we can use to make it work and to invite all the team to run workshops when we understand each other, have common language, common goals, and we know how the project is starting, from what we are starting, and what we have to do together, and everyone knows its role in the project.
Okay, and another point is to just speak and use the same language. So if you have these workshops about the domain, that's perfectly fine. And then we just should extend it with the language we actually need to know, but often it's not defined, it's not documented. And by this, I mean there are sometimes slight differences between some terms. like what is user, which is member, which is account, which is profile. Sometimes these things just mix, and then it's a problem to figure out, especially if designers use one term and someone other use another term, or cart or basket, whatever, just could be problematic.
Yeah, it's your topic.
Right. So yeah, and changelogs, as we mentioned, it's quite important to have them. I know that modern design tools can have commits, like developers do, and it could help us to go just further and have some changelogs, for example. So if developers document what was changed, so other developers can still use this application, all of us should be just writing what was changed, and we should just be sure that our project managers, for example, are aware of that, and they should actually document this changes. So it's not like everyone should just sit and write stuff in some documents, but this process should be just kept. And if your company doesn't keep it, maybe you should just propose it that someone should write this change logs and yeah.
And also exchanging like knowledge and inspiration between developers and designers is really important, because designer can get like inspired by some code snippets, and then first of all you probably will be more close when you're starting a project, maybe with some effect you want to both implement, and you will be like just have like better relations if you like be doing that. Of course, you'll be like having like more pleasant conversation and cooperation during the design process.
And for example, even if designers don't know something about what can be done today in the web, for example, then front-end developer who might see some nice example of what can be done can just share, and maybe in few weeks you can implement something like this, because the designer can just actually use this, and it's quite good when you just share this knowledge. And in the end, feedback. And it's not only about feedback, like talk to the other guy that's just good work, or something like this, which makes the relation better, but also about feedback about particular parts in the job. So you see the design, and this is, let's say, work in progress. You give feedback. You say that this is good, this is bad, this will be very hard to implement, or it doesn't make sense, or something like this, and you just use your experience to make the stuff better. And you will make the designer better, you will make the product better. And designers also can give some feedback, maybe not on the code, but they can comment and the results. And in the end, this constructive feedback will be very good, because it's common for developers to give feedback by code reviews, but across departments it's not actually working that good.
Yeah, but to get on the same page, we need some education, both of us. And let's think what designers should learn or could learn to make this cooperation better. So first of all, knowing the all basic CSS rules will really help, because like using the padding word, which is not really like that common in design to use. We more say like light or something like that. Margin, yes, but it's not to use these CSS rules to communicate with your developer. It will be just faster, easier, and clear.
Yeah, so first of all, the same language. As Ruta said, designers have mostly margins, and let's say in CSS you have margins like outer and paddings, which are inner margins in the object. So these are quite small things, which the designers and backend developers, whatever, can just know, and it will just make everyone work much more smooth. And this is not only about the CSS, it's obviously about any device you are making UI on, so like Android, iOS, whatever.
And also a very easy thing for designers to learn and to make this cooperation better is learning dev tools. So you can do 3 things in that. First of all, you will know more CSS rules. You get along with them. You will know how to talk to your developer. Also, you can make some small changes to preview some changes you want to make, and even send it this exact values to the developer to change something, but you can test it first of all, and also testing the design in responsive mode and also on mobile devices. Of course, not that exact, but it's still helpful for designers to see what is happening with the design which is implemented.
There are more than 3 things you can do with DevTools. But yeah, that's true. And actually, it's quite good if your designer actually can have some knowledge how to do this basic front-end stuff, because it's much easier when you receive the information that something should be this, and you just copy-paste, then, yeah, just show me the result, and I will check. When you recompile, and tomorrow we can check how it works when you change the font size and something like this, which is ridiculous. All right, then another thing. Let's imagine that you have to code some email template, which is ridiculous and very, very bad. And if you are provided with some fancy design, and then you have to create the layout for emails, but you know that these parsers of HTML are still using tables and Word 97 engine, then it's quite hard. But maybe designers don't know it, and maybe you can just send them some framework which compiles to this ugly email templates. They will thank you for that, and you will thank yourselves, because they will just follow the guides. They will see what can be done, and well, they can just use it exactly as the same as for example, some visualization tools.
And also about that, I've been in a situation when the developers were using this kind of libraries, but they didn't say that to me. And they were just, at some point I figured out that they were afraid I would make a design too complicated to implement with this, for example, chart.js. So, but they never told me they use that. So, it was it's normal and easier even for designers to know that that developers are using this kind of libraries, because it's also easy for us to use it, really.
And SVG syntax, which mostly are produced by designers, but they produce it like the designers do. So they just click this stuff in some Illustrator stuff, and sometimes, for example, Sketch produces really, really bad SVG code, and if the designer just knows some basics, like what exactly does it mean, or how exactly does it work, not exactly, how basically it works, it will be much helpful, because you can just ask designer, all right, can you provide me the icons which will have no fill, because I will just do it in CSS. And basically they will say, all right, no fill, and it's white because the background in Illustrator is white. So, the basics of SVG template, the same as CSS or HTML, which will a lot of help for next work with these files, for example.
Yes, and something which is really helpful for both sides, it's using examples on different websites of animation mostly, or CodePen, which is helpful because when you send the effect you want as a designer to a developer, and it's already a code, the 50% of the work is mostly done. So yeah, it's basic tool to communicate if it's about iteration of or animations.
Especially if you want to have some to do some animation, and you don't know how it should look like, and designer will just send you some, do it like this and just change the colors. Well, easy, right? Yeah, and maybe something for you.
And also, developers should learn some things, basic about composition and typography and aesthetics. It's just enough sometimes to have this helicopter view on the design. So you see if everything is aligned to the left, the next thing you have to add probably has to be aligned to the left. Or if a client will ask you about adding some text to the design, you will use one of the following text styles. You will not like find another font style to use. So really, it's like both sides are happy then, because you don't have to look for the designer to change anything, like each thing, small things. And also designers don't have to like think that they have to really make a whole design to explain it to you.
And it's not that hard. There are some books like, or articles even like designed for developers, which are like very basic, how to change the font size or how big should be the differences. You can just learn it once and then you will just more or less feel it. And then just basic knowledge how to use your computer. So it's not that hard to scale or crop some image. Maybe it's funny, but you just don't want to ask designer to make something smaller because you can do it on your own.
And also it's helpful if developer knows some basics about user experience, because at the end we are all making the design for the user. So also developers then can propose better solutions, or also they understand why some elements of the website, even if they are maybe more complicated to implement, they are important because it's like a good decision, which is like for the user. So, yeah.
And often we can use as a developer some knowledge of our previous experience. And if we know that, for example, designer provide us some, let's say, custom forms, elements, selects, whatever, and then we want to use it in the mobile device, for example, and we know that previously we had a lot of problems because, I don't know, Safari renders this bad or something like this. Well, when we actually know, we test our stuff, what we do, and we know that in this previous project, this custom element doesn't work good, and just use the native one or something like this. This is just this user experience, and it's our experience that we know that. So, well, we can just use it, and it will be much more effective to the project. Yeah, and some also, let's say, stuff about what can be done quickly. So first of all, browsers and other devices, phones mostly, what can be done. So I don't know, for me it's obvious that in the front end we can do offline apps, for example, right now. But how many designers know that? We can tell our designers that it's possible, and maybe we can do something interesting. And also we will be excited because we can also implement some modern stuff. Also, the differences between browsers. So sometimes, if the front-end developer is not aware of what can be done in the browser, we might end up with something like spending hours of supporting some old Internet Explorer sheet and something. We can just, well, try to figure out if it's really required to support, and maybe if we are doing some MVP, we can just ask business if we really want this effect, if we support old browsers, something like this. Sometimes it makes the difference. And another thing is the difference between, for example, Mac and Windows, like scroll bars. Sometimes this stuff is really hard, especially if, for example, company like mine use only MacBooks, and then we see a screenshot on Windows, and it's like, well, very hard to recognize even sometimes. Whoa. And also the CSS possibilities. So, well, a few years ago, we might say that don't use this custom whatever grids, use Bootstrap, 12 columns, just leave it like it is. And now we have the CSS grid, for example. We are no longer afraid of using this very fancy grids. I don't know, intersection observers, position sticky, everything like this is now possible to use in modern browsers. So we as a developers should be aware of that. It can be done. Also, if we just tell it to the designers or they figure out on their own, it will be much more efficient for us to make better products in the end. Something? No. And in the end, some usability of form controls. It's very important part of the application, and if we mess it up, it will be very hard for a user to use it in the end. it's quite common practice that we, for example, do this custom selects on the app, but maybe we should fall back to the native one when we are using the native the mobile device, for example, or be aware of how they behave between different systems and the browsers, because we don't want to have some device to block the user for completing the checkout, for example. It will be very bad for us.
And something what is not always possible, but it would be nice to have, is the design documentation for the developer. So first of all, developers should get a text document when there are all requirements and scenarios from the client on the business side. So you know what the design is about and what to focus on, what were the goals. So you can also give the feedback about that. And also, it's nice if the architecture of information is made as a flowchart, so you can also see the structure of the application to know how it works, not going to the design like page by page to understand it. And of course, all pages are included, also the ones as search result page or for example, thank you pages, error pages, and it's made as a clickable prototype. So then you can like see how it's behave and see if something is missing. And also the prototyping tools for the clickable prototype, like InVision, allows you also to comment the design or make notes on that, and it helps also to describe the more complicated components or also more, maybe not complicated, but all the animations are used on the design, or also give the links for similar website or codes, and yeah. And also the UI style guide, which is one source of truth for all the colors. If there are like 5 gray colors, shades, or there are like 3 blue colors, or there's just one, then you know. And you also know how also validation, for example, can behave. But most important that developers also gives feedback.
Feedback, and especially it's our job to ensure that designers actually provide it. And well, obviously, if you are doing some small website, you don't require the big assets, whatever component library for it. But if you are receiving the big enterprise application designs, that you should just check it out, write down any questions, comment it, and check if you have everything you need and you will need in the future, so we can just work with it later.
Yeah, and also today's UI tools are not that retarded as Photoshop was, which was never meant to be a UI design tool. And today's app are really focused to make this cooperation between designers and developers more smooth and like easier. For example, Sketch is the application which is like the most famous one used now in the UI design if someone has Mac. And it's focused on to have plugins which people also can add to the application. And it's focused on creating the component library. So they promote this component thinking in the design, which was like not that common before. And also, for example, Figma runs in the browser, and it allows for real-time cooperation and has really nice version control. And Framer X, which is like very new one, converts designs to React components, and Studio is Design Studio from InVision, is focused on animation transitions, so you can show how the animation could work, not necessarily on the code pen. And yeah.
And also, we don't have to download Photoshop or other design tools anymore as developers, because there are quite many applications right now which can be filled with some designs from the apps, like like Sketch, for example, or even Photoshop, and they can just export necessary stuff we need. So we can just inspect the CSS, the distances between objects, we can download some layers, some assets. Basically, it's very, very good, and they are often also free for some trial. Well, one project, well, something like this uses, so you can just try it. You don't have to download any special design apps just to work well. And it looks like this, for example. You can just click the button and see what's the font family, what's the color, what's the sizes. It's very, very comfy to use. All right. And in the end, to summarize, first thing, the communication. No matter what you do, everything can be solved if you just do the feedback, give the feedback, and communicate. Because often, also even designers and developers have the same thinking, but they cannot just find the same way how to implement this stuff. And some basic education. You don't have to be a front-end developer if you are a designer, and also you don't have to learn the design if you're a developer. But some basics are just really easy to learn, and it will make work more efficient. And in the end, just make sure the tools you are using are configured well, and they just do the job they are meant to be. Like, for example, use the Slack if you know it's good. If you don't, check something else, but try to improve and try to find something which will fit your needs. And some sources. It will be uploaded later. And in the end,
this topic is the cooperation between developers and designers. It's not that new to us because we made some projects together and we've been through some fights as developer and designer together. So we created an event in Krakow which is focused on cooperation between designers, developers, and business part. And it's focused to show this one topic from different perspectives. So if you're interested in this topic or you even want to add something from yourself, just find Wiedza Bubble on Facebook and you can contact us or just come on the event. You're really welcome. Yeah, thank you very much.
Do you have any questions? It's hard to see because the light is oh, it's here. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for a great presentation. It was really fun to look at this. Two different perspectives from design and development. I think that one of the things you said that we should use the same language, and yeah, definitely. But it's kind of like it's very hard to do that. I find it very challenging. But the most challenging that I find is that it's mostly with the client and kind of like the team. Like if you have like designer, developer, we can always work things out eventually as a team. But the most challenge I find is like with the client. So what's your experience with that when it comes to like communication with the client? Because I mean, sometimes things that you think are sound positive in your head, in your mind, and good, doesn't necessarily mean the same thing from their side. So what's your experience there?
Still only one microphone.
so I can start. Thanks. So I think that what clients thinks is not really in common about this with the same language, because the same language means mostly to merge this knowledge into one terms. So for example, in design you have kerning, in the CSS you have letter spacing. This is the same language which we meant, and this is very simple to use. Even for a client, you can just teach them. And about thinking like client and their ideas and then what we think is good, well, I think there is no solution for that. I mean, there are good clients and there are bad clients, and sometimes they can trust you, and you can just say to them, dude, you're paying me a shit ton of money to do this job, so maybe you should trust me that I'm the guy who can make it, right? And just trust me, right? Of course, it's not easy. I had clients who were so good that they were just looking at these DevTools and giving me the snippets how they think it should work, right? So you can find something really amazing sometimes. But I think that it's quite another topic for another presentation, how to talk with clients who are just not cooperating with you.
But also, for example, from my perspective, it's really helpful if you explain client here how things work and why they work like that and why it's good. And for example, arguments about the user are mostly effective. So